We are back on Plate Forward. Jaime Saginor today. Jaime, thank you for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm
It
happy to
is
be here.
awesome. It's very nice to have you here. You are writer and actor and producer by default, like so many of us are independent
Yeah.
filmmakers. The film is Black Creek Trail. And would you like to introduce it yourself or the film in any way prior to diving in?
Sure. Just the simple sort of log line for it is that a woman goes on a solo backpacking trip and meets an overly friendly and helpful hiker who she can't seem to shake.
Yeah.
And that's the gist of it.
Cool, cool. So, we were talking about your deceptively simple name to pronounce, Saginor, which I've gotten right. I think I want to keep saying,
You
yeah,
you did it perfectly.
right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
hmm
Um, but the film, unlike your last name, is deceptively layered, in
hmm
my opinion. And it's kind of scary. It's pretty scary.
Yeah.
Right. So unlike the log line where it could kind of go either way, like, oh, this guy's falling, or maybe he's, I don't know, yeah, got a candy bar he wants to give her, whatever. It's unlike that.
Yeah.
So, starting with the first question to play it forward, the germinal seed, the little speck of dust,
hmm
pre-thought
hmm
that landed in your consciousness to blossom into Black Creek Trail, where did that come from and what was it?
Well, I was actually on a sort of solo backpacking trip for
No
myself,
kidding.
and I had a bit of a terrifying experience. Everything turned out okay, but this is kind of the what if version. And
Oh,
honestly, what happened was not that much, and it was mostly in my head.
yeah,
The fear and the panic that came
sure.
afterwards was mostly in my head. But what went on in my head during that time that I was panicking was basically, writing this movie on its
Right,
own. And
right.
so, yeah.
And I'm sure there's so much more than that to it. Like, yeah, okay, that's where the idea came from, but
Yeah,
the experience to want to do the idea and to have the fear around the idea probably comes from a lifetime of experience, your own personal experience,
absolutely.
you know?
Absolutely. It's a very common, because it's about intuition. It's
Yeah,
about, listening to your intuition, but for women, particularly have been conditioned
yeah.
to ignore their intuition, in favor of being nice, in
Yes,
favor of
yes,
not
yes, yeah,
offending.
yeah,
And so that internal battle is
yeah.
really, what I wanted to work with.
Yeah. And you boom, you nailed it in terms of, I ask the second question. The second question is the statement. What is the statement of the film as a viewer? Because you have special insight as a writer and an
Right.
actor, but now as a viewer,
Well, do you mean like what do you come away with?
yeah,
Or yeah.
yeah,
So I think, again, ultimately it is about intuition, but hopefully if we've done our job correctly, then there's still some hedging about, like, but wait a minute, if you really think about it, maybe he blah blah blah. Like, we posted, in the festivals, and also, as it's been put out online, there have been a lot of people that think the ending is ambiguous. And right. And so, but it's fascinating to us because that actually makes me feel like we kind of did the job too well, in a sense, because the battle in her head is also now happening in the audience's head.
hmm,
Like, well, maybe I'm wrong. Well, maybe he actually, that back and forth.
right,
And so
right,
ultimately it is about trusting your intuition. So what hopefully audience members would walk away with, thematically, is trusting your intuition. However, I think that the fact that people are walking away with something a little different sometimes is a bit exciting, because then it's gotten very psychological,
yeah.
it's gotten into people's heads in a way that I didn't expect it to, I didn't expect it to not be resolved. Yeah.
It is very interesting that that occurs, as a writer myself and as a literary scholar at one point, English, like whatever. Anyway, um, the narrative, the written page, the narrative, the storyline, the arc, the it has layers. It has a storyline, it has a subtext, and it has a theme. Those are the primary things. When I take notes about a film, that's what I write down.
Yeah.
So the storyline is a stalker, hiker kind of story. The subtext around it, first of all, the theme is, the character is clearly misogynistic. I mean, there's no doubt about
Right.
that. That is
Right.
clearly in,
Yeah.
and the character is clearly written and directed in a scary, he's a threatening, scary character, which is who's manipulative as well and has, is
Yeah.
right. So, and he is also clearly has a predatory quality in that the theme is a power struggle. Like he's pushing her. It's not like, oh, hey, I think you're cute. How's it
Yeah.
going?
Yeah.
You want to hang out?
Right.
It's like,
Hmm.
oh, you're coming with me.
Yeah.
Oh, you're not? Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, yeah. And, this, I actually wrote the feature script first before I made the short
Mm,
version of this.
mm,
And the character, everything you're saying is true. And I also wanted the character to truly believe that he's the victim. That he's a victim, that he's not a predator, that he's not a bad guy, that
right.
he is a good
Sure.
guy,
Sure.
and everyone else has perceived him
Right.
incorrectly and
Right.
has done him
Right.
wrong. And so,
Right.
hopefully, uh, and I think that the actor, did a good job with that. Although in the short is very different because it
Right.
has to be a little more streamlined and a little more, to one side of things. But
I hear you.
yeah,
I hear you. No, of course, you want a multidimensional character who
yeah,
thinks that their own kind of internal storyline is
yes,
valid one, and who is
absolutely,
certainly the little clue nuance that seemingly he may have lost his daughter, and he's just a guy who's suffering, and
yes,
so
yes,
we pick up on that.
yeah,
Um, and he's still a misogynist, right?
yes,
He's
yes,
still clearly a
yes, yes,
powerful, dominant
sure,
force, and we as the
yeah.
audience kind of, depending on where we sit on that
Well,
spectrum, kind of
absolutely.
right
Depending,
decide
yeah.
if he's like, hey,
Yes.
he's a normal guy or maybe not. So um
Yeah.
but where I'm going with all this is I think in the question of the takeaway, because I love, a lot of times filmmakers, because you really, film, you explore your own theme, and sometimes you don't even know what you're exploring, and
Sure.
I think
Yeah.
the fact that you're really, the critical thing that you said right away
Hmm.
is that this social cobbling away at the female, oh, male too, by the way, but the
Sure. Sure. Yep.
female
Hmm.
um intuitive nature,
Yeah.
and how that ultimately leaves her vulnerable to victimization. And that
Yeah.
is the same for male too.
Yeah.
I mean, that
Yeah.
definitely, but it happens a different way, and because of the
Hmm.
genders and all this stuff. I mean, that
Hmm.
we never saw, but that is a really painful thing to think about, and is a very
Yeah.
scary thing to think about.
Yeah.
So, I do have a daughter. She's
Yeah.
4 in May coming up.
Oh,
And
wow. Okay.
yeah, so in terms of the takeaway and the message, uh, is that, I think, like you've already said, basically, it is you cannot go against the strongest thing you have, that is the most protective thing you have,
Yeah.
which is your own internal intuition, and
Yeah.
you run with that. And if you second guess that, you often, if not always, will get yourself into trouble.
Absolutely. And to the degree that women or whoever is, like you said, it's not just limited to women, but whoever does do that, it could be that you're choosing niceness or whatever it is over your own safety. I mean,
Right, right, right,
to your detriment
right,
to a
right,
very large
right,
degree.
right,
Yeah.
right. And
Which is the training. And that's the insidious part about it. And that's the scary part about it.
it's
Yeah.
totally insidious. And the question there is, how and why is this happening? Why is this
Yeah.
our fear why do we fear appearances? Like we can't handle confrontation,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
we've got to be nice at the expense and risk of
Yes.
our own
Yes.
lives.
Yes.
Like,
Well, I
where's
mean,
that coming from?
for women, it's just ingrained in society. So when women have watched this, people they most often say, "Oh my gosh, I've felt that a million times." But not only that, I would do the exact same thing. Because sometimes when men have watched it, they say, "Why didn't she do this? Why didn't she do
Right,
that?"
right,
And
sure.
every woman says, I wanted to scream at her, and yet I would have done the same thing. I would have
Why?
done the same thing because, well, there's two reasons. One, because it is so ingrained to question yourself and to not offend. Like if you, the amount of times that I've experienced, and I know so many other people have experienced, actually saying something or standing up for yourself, and the backlash of, how dare you be so, presumptuous, even if it's just like a date or anything. I mean, do you know what I'm saying? So, and the backlash against women doing that is so harsh from such an early age. But there's also another thing, which is the tactic of staying alive. So in a situation like this with someone who you might actually be not sure if they are going to do something, standing up for yourself is usually, unfortunately, a way that triggers a man like that, and your safety is in danger in that way too. So it's just you're like riding this fine line of not triggering them, you know um and then also questioning yourself if you're even being fair to them. It's just a whole mess, and that whole mess is what I wanted to write about, because it's a mess, and it's a battle, and it's, very, very scary, internally, but then when it turns external, turns into horror.
And it seems so socially arbitrary. It
Yeah.
seems like very like specific to American middle upper class society.
I don't
And
know. I don't know. I think women, I personally think that
yeah,
women in any situation have probably experienced this,
cross culturally.
because cross culturally, I
Yeah,
do think so, because
yeah,
of the triggering,
yeah.
the not wanting to trigger, and not want, and also the backlash against, women. I don't think there's differences and nuances, but I do think that this is probably a global, issue. I do think.
No doubt a global issue,
Yeah.
no doubt. Most importantly, I mean, I talk to people around the world, and there are films that are similar. There's the horrific transgressions being committed all over the world. Um, Most importantly, how do we teach women, men, boys, girls to that niceness
Yeah.
or social roles do not conflict with um, setting boundaries, protecting yourself, standing up for yourself?
That's a very good question. That's a big question. I don't totally know the answer, because I think there's so many layers to why it exists. Partly the you know being public and very social about this conversation, which I think is happening, particularly with social media. There's a lot of outward discussion about what abuse looks like, or what misogyny looks like, or what you can do, and how, and people standing together against it, because when you're alone against it, it's very difficult to win. I
Yeah,
mean, and it
yeah,
could cost you your life.
yeah.
So I think there's that, but then it's also just the entire culture would need to shift, which is that, for women to stop being punished for standing up for themselves. And I think that we have a long ways to go on that. So,
Yeah, as I reflect, how I might, answer the question, and I think about everything that's been going on. I don't watch media, contrary to being in social media right
Yeah.
now.
Right.
I don't
Yeah.
watch the
Hmm.
news. I figure whatever I need to get, weather, I'll look at the phone. But I get it from the people around me. And if I need to look something up, I will. But point being is that, the outrageous things that have been going on with Hollywood, from this person to that
Hmm.
person to this person. I mean,
Hmm.
it's
Yeah.
just like, you can't
Yeah.
write this stuff. Like, it
Yeah.
is crazy.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, and it's sort of like the dark cellar of this hierarchy and pressure has kind of emerged. At the same time, you have the sexual revolution and sort of the feminist empowerment from the 60s, and you have women in these you know highly powerful roles. And
Yeah.
apparently that's not happening in Hollywood necessarily. um
But it's not
so
just Hollywood. I
yeah,
mean, I think that that's a microcosm of what's happening in any industry, pretty much anywhere. I think this is a pretty ubiquitous experience for women. And I think, and not just limited to women. Again, I want to say
yeah,
that.
sure.
But yeah, I think that what happened, when you read some of these stories, is very similar to what is happening in this film, which is that the second guessing of yourself over your safety
Yeah, yeah,
is so ingrained.
yeah,
Because I remember when all that started, and people, particularly guys or people who hadn't been in situations like that, how could they get themselves into situations like that? Well, when you're being told by everyone around you, no, 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 that's normal, no, no, don't listen to your intuition, no, no, this is the way it's done, no, no, you're supposed to meet, and if he asks you, you go, because that's the audition, and sometimes they happen in this room and sometimes they happen in that. When you're told that over and over and over, and you're like, okay, I guess this is what I'm supposed to do, and then you end up, overriding your intuition the whole way. But it's just,
yeah.
I know why they all ended up in that situation, because I've been trained the same way, so I can understand from the outside if you haven't. And I don't think it's limited at all to Hollywood. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think we already answered the question that I posed. Now that I reflect on our conversation, it's like,
Yeah.
you tell stories like these. You tell
Yeah.
stories, you tell people, you trust your intuition. You don't go
Yeah.
against that. That is,
Yeah.
the
Hmm.
law. That's your
Hmm.
innate
Hmm.
law. Trust your
Yeah.
innate guidance.
Yeah.
The last question to play it forward is, as a person, how have you been changed since making this movie?
That's a good question. Well, let's see. I mean, I think that the response from audience, and particularly people who've experienced this, has been really powerful, because it was something that it was in my head and that I experienced and that I was exploring. But then to realize, how how common and how universal this is, I think it made me then feel more motivated to tell this story, particularly in the complete form, which will be next. But because it's important, I feel like it's important, and the discussion that it fosters feels important, particularly the discussion from people who have not experienced this, which tends to, be more so gendered towards men. The surprise of why and how, and what's going on, and then in yourself, the questioning as you're watching it of, oh, I'm confused about what I believe now. I'm questioning myself. So I think I feel more motivated as a filmmaker, to tell stories, because I just realized, just so many of them are so universal, and what it can do to recognize yourself on film can be very healing.
Yeah.
And I love to, I want to foster that.
Yeah, yeah. And I think, I hear this theme again and again and again, and myself, relate with it, is like, that is the power of art and art making. And I
Yeah.
think a lot
Yeah,
of times,
absolutely.
people forget that as filmmakers, because it's
Hmm.
filmmaking, unlike a lot of other art avenues, is so much commercially centered.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
very commercial, and it doesn't necessarily need to be so. And that's, something that we're trying to promote.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
that they lose track that, yeah, filmmakers are artists, and
Yeah.
the healing properties of art. And that's, the unique contribution of the arts, is that elevation of
Absolutely.
consciousness and healing.
Hmm.
that we, that's, you can't, put a price on that. It's intangible.
Absolutely. Yeah. As the writer's strike looms on in
Is that
Hollywood
right?
right
I
now.
would know
Yeah.
because I
Yeah.
have no clue. But
Yeah,
thanks for letting me know.
absolutely. Yeah.
Jaime
Yeah.
Saginor,
Yes.
filmmaker, artist, writer, actor. Thank you so much for being on the show. The film
Thank
is
you so much for
Black
having me.
Creek Trail. Our pleasure.
Yeah.
My pleasure. Thank you. All right. Till next
Thank
time,
you.
everybody, play it forward.
Okay.
We're out. Peace.